While most investors are fighting over the same syndication deals that get pitched to physicians constantly, there's a $200 billion mortgage note market that barely anyone talks about. Today, I'm showing you how to tap into it. Welcome back to the Alternative Investing Doctor podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Keith Grosshans. The average physician will earn over $10 million in their career. Yet studies show that 1 in 4 doctors over age 65 retire with less than $1 million saved. Why is that? Because we're trained to diagnose diseases, not investment opportunities. Today, I'm showing you where to find mortgage notes, the financial asset class that can potentially help you create passive income while maintaining your clinical practice. A common question I get from other physician investors is, where do you find mortgage notes? Unlike stocks, where you have a brokerage account that gives you access to minute-to-minute pricing information, or real estate, where you can go on Zillow or Redfin, notes do require some specialized knowledge. Now, let's get into the 6 primary sources for quality mortgage notes. The first source I'd like to discuss is purchasing or dealing directly with other note investors. This is one of the main strategies for most individuals, and it typically requires building relationships, networking, attending events, or using platforms like LinkedIn or Facebook where note investors are active. This allows for a couple of different strategies, such as buying partial notes. Often, investors may purchase an entire note and then sell off a portion of the payments in order to get some additional funds that they might go use to purchase other notes or other investments. Oftentimes they might offer entire notes for purchase as well, potentially if they're again looking to reposition or adjust their portfolio holdings. And they may also offer opportunities to lend against the notes that they have in their portfolio. So you can become a secured or private lender in these cases. Some of the advantages of dealing directly with other note investors is some of these strategies like the partials and lending against notes gives accessibility with some lower capital requirements. For example, you could potentially look for partials or lend against notes in the $10,000 to $25,000 range. I have purchased 2 partial notes from note investors, and I do think that this is a good way to get involved in the note business and to get some assets on your books. However, of course, there are some drawbacks to this approach, and one of these is that there is some reliance on the original investor's due diligence. You have to make sure that they do have a quality asset that they're offering to you, either as a partial, as a lending opportunity, or if they're selling you the whole note. Of course, typically they should make due diligence and collateral files available for you to review, but essentially you are trusting their judgment to some degree. And it's kind of like relying on another physician's consult when you're seeing one of your patients. The second source of note inventory is online trading platforms. A very common one in the industry is PaperStac. You could kind of think of it like the MLS of notes. Some advantages of the platforms is they're very convenient. You can access them from anywhere, and they're fairly transparent in the offerings. Another nice thing about them is that they're digital transactions, and they often offer specific tools in the process, including escrow accounts, which can help streamline the whole transaction. This is great for time-constrained physicians, as it can put everything into one place. You're not having to email people back and forth, so it definitely does have a valuable time-saving aspect to it. However, some of the drawbacks might include competition. So certainly there are many active investors on the platform who buy a lot of notes, and this can make the quality notes disappear very quickly, particularly if you're not setting up the correct notifications on the platforms to let you know about new notes that are first coming to market. And the other issue that can come up with these is the quality is variable. So again, some of the best quality might get snatched up first, and you might be left with some of the lower quality notes. So you do have to be very careful when looking at these platforms to make sure that it is an asset that you're comfortable with, and you may need to do some real digging and some very thorough due diligence to make sure that you're getting a good asset before you place a bid. Another thing to bear in mind is that within the note industry, once you have committed to buying an asset, you pretty much have to keep your word. So you better be sure you want to buy the asset before you offer any commitment to any sellers. The next source of notes is hedge funds. Institutional players will acquire large portfolios, and then eventually they will start to sell off individual notes, ones that might not fit their fund criteria, or if they just need to liquidate and raise funds to go and purchase other assets. An advantage to this is that there is volume and consistent deal flow. However, they don't just deal with anyone. You have to be able to establish a relationship with them and prove that you're a reliable buyer and customer for them. So of course, one of the challenges is that they have a preference for experienced investors who can move quickly on large deals, and that might include the ability to close on multiple notes in a single transaction, often known as a pool. So this can be difficult as an individual investor, particularly if you're time constrained and not actively doing this as your full-time career. A solution for this would be to potentially build credibility over time and access these resources as you gain experience, or you could potentially pool resources with other colleagues that increases your buying power and credibility. The fourth main source of mortgage notes is actually from banks and financial institutions. Now, this is not a typical source for most individual note investors. Again, this is often going to be for larger players in the space and potentially people running their own funds. However, they can be sellers of loan portfolios, and they do sometimes sell individual notes, particularly if you're dealing with smaller community banks or credit unions. An advantage of these notes is that they're often higher quality because they'll have been underwritten to guidelines, the federal guidelines like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac standards. However, again, one of the barriers here is you typically need to be able to have some good purchasing power. Often you're not able to just buy an individual note, and so you'll probably need some pretty significant capital or need to have a pretty good relationship with the bank to qualify to purchase any of these assets. So really, this is not where most people start, and this would be kind of like jumping straight into complex procedures within your intern year, right? It's probably not the best idea. But again, look for opportunity. Occasionally, regional or community banks can sell off individual notes that they don't want to keep on their books, whether they're non-performing or they just need to liquidate and get it off the balance sheet. So a strategy there would be to work on, over time, building a banking relationship with those local institutions such that you could potentially access some of this inventory in the future. And also you may find yourself getting some good opportunities to leverage funds from the bank if you need financing. The fifth way to source notes is to actually create your own notes through seller financing. There are two primary methods to accomplish this. You can purchase a property and then sell it to a buyer or borrower on owner financing terms, or you can buy a property that is subject to existing financing and create what's known as a wraparound mortgage. In each of these cases, there's a lot of flexibility in how you can structure these deals. Some of the main advantages here is that you have complete control over the terms, including the interest rate, the duration of the loan, and all of the documentation. Of course, that brings some drawbacks to the table as well. This is a much more active strategy, and you're going to have to be more involved and have more real estate expertise to be able to successfully complete some of these deals. A challenge here would be that with this added time component and how active of a strategy this is, it might not balance very well with your clinical responsibilities. However, it is an excellent strategy for any physicians who already have real estate experience, or it can be an excellent exit strategy from rental properties that you may already own in your portfolio. And then the sixth source of notes is mom and pop note holders. These are individual note holders who sold one of their properties with owner financing. They may hold the note for a period of time, and eventually they might need money. They may need a lump sum for some type of emergency or other life event, and don't really need the monthly payments anymore as much as they need that lump sum of cash. An advantage here is that often these notes can be purchased at a discount and there's less competition. However, there is a lot more work required to find these opportunities. Often you have to do a lot of networking, and you may need to do a specific marketing campaign such as direct mail, calling people, etc. So there is a lot of time investment to actually try to acquire some of these notes. Another challenge of the mom and pop notes is that they may not be underwritten to standards like you might see from conventional bank notes, and this can introduce additional risk and therefore does require additional due diligence and care. And a lot of that is the reason that these notes typically are going to be bought at a significant discount. Now, of course, that could require a significant amount of negotiation with the sellers to be willing to actually give up the note at the price you think it's worth. So there's a lot of time involved. You need to develop a lot of relationships and nurturing. So if you really enjoy sales and those types of conversations, this would definitely be an avenue to consider. But bear in mind, it's definitely not necessarily for beginners, and it's going to require a lot more time investment and a lot more expertise to do successfully. For beginners, a typical recommendation would be to start with purchasing partials from established investors, or potentially getting into a private lending situation where you're lending money to an established note investor against some of their note holdings, because this provides more security and allows opportunity to learn more about the due diligence process and risk profile of these assets before diving in and purchasing a full note and being fully responsible for the outcome of that investment. For those of you who are more time constrained but have capital, it would make sense to build relationships with note providers to potentially start purchasing partials, or even look for opportunities with note funds, as many reputable note investors do have note fund opportunities. For those of you who have more real estate experience or have more time, it might make sense to start exploring how to create your own notes, or how to search out those mom and pop note holders to try to purchase those notes from them. Most successful investors will eventually use multiple sources to acquire deals. However, I think it does make a lot of sense to become comfortable with one source initially that fits your time constraints, your experience, and your budget. That's a wrap on today's episode of the Alternative Investing Doctor podcast. If you found this helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe and leave a review. It helps other physicians discover the show. Stay tuned, because coming soon I'll be sharing a much more personal story about a $50,000 syndication investment that's probably going to be a total loss. It's not fun to talk about, but I think the lessons could save you from making the same expensive mistake that I did. Remember, everything I share on this podcast is for educational purposes only and isn't personalized investment advice. Always do your own due diligence and consult with qualified professionals. I'm Dr. Keith Grosshans, and I'll see you next week. Until then, keep building towards your freedom.